I couldn't do it justice. So I'll do a quick intro and then I'm gonna just let you take it away.
Thank you.
I think we can go ahead and start. Ann, are you good with that?
I'm good.
Okay, awesome. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this really exciting presentation on CERT and COVID-19 and things that we really should know as CERTs in this pandemic, which hopefully, as of today, we're oranged here. Yay! One step closer. Very exciting. I'm sure I see lots of smiles and I'm really happy to see that. I'd like to introduce Ann Degheest. I'm going to let her tell you what she does, but she has been doing some great YouTube insights. She calls them Ann's Insights. They're awesome. She presented to us a couple of months ago, and I asked her if she could do another one for us that kind of relates a little bit to CERT. Because I know it's something that since we're opening a little more, we may be venturing out a little more. So I'm going to let you take it away, Ann. I know we've talked about if you could turn on your camera, that would be great. It's kind of hard as a presenter to talk to a bunch of blank screens. So we would appreciate that if you could do that. You don't have to look at me. I've had a long day, so don't worry about what you look like. Just come hop on and join us. And I'll let you chat. I'll be monitoring the chat. So we'll stop with questions. If you guys could just do the chat instead of yourselves, that would be awesome. All right, Ann, take it away.
Thank you, Victoria, for setting this up, and thank you for everybody to spending 1 hour of your time. And hopefully I can bring you some knowledge there and make you safer. What we're going to do today, because it's a large group, I'm going to get a couple of polls so that we know what you want to talk about and try to make it a bit more interactive. I will try to keep some Q&A at the end there. So I would like to cover the epidemiology. There's a third wave going on in Europe, and we want to make sure we learn a lesson so the same doesn't happen here. God knows we don't want another wave. Some of you may have been vaccinated, but some of you should get ready to be vaccinated. There are some do's and don'ts you need to be aware of. We'll talk about the variants. You know, there's a big variance in California. That's worrisome. It's over 50% of the new California cases. We'll talk about the long COVID risk. As CERT, you need to be aware if somebody has a heart attack and you treat them, it could be due to COVID. And so I'll kind of explain a little bit what's going on there. If you're interested, I have extra slide on safety, mask, and infection risk. We're going to do a quick poll just to see what you want to cover. So we'll try to be interactive as much as we can with a large group. So a quick introduction on myself. I put together this insights because I live in Los Altos Hills, and several of my neighbors have organized a group of 35 houses in my neighborhood for safety reasons. And they all wanted to know about it. And it grew into this insight on YouTube because I got to a point where 100 people on Zoom is not really effective. And so if you're interested, I've had over 35,000 views with a 98% up rating, which, you know, on social media is difficult to get. And there's a lot of videos and content. So feel free to go to the Insight channel on YouTube. There's a lot of information. I'm only going to cover some of it. Typically, I post every 2 weeks. The first video is on epidemiology, what's happening in the US with the virus. The second one is more clinical. I've combined both of them today, so hang in there. So my quick background, I am not a doctor. So whatever I recommend, please check with your doctors, you know, in what you're doing. I've been in healthcare for the last 35 years. I've been what's called a health tech pioneer. I've started several companies, including, and I've been involved with several companies, including pulse oximetry. All of you should have a pulse oximeter at home by now. If you don't, we can talk at the end. It's really important. You know, that's the first sign that you may have a problem in pulmonary problems there. But I've basically helped develop a lot of products in patient monitoring in hospitals, ICUs, and I'm now running a group called Health Tech Capital, which is an investor group. We've done over 45 investment in this space. So I'm coming at this from an entrepreneur and business side. So, and in my spare time, I'm an artist, just for the fun of it. So these are the typical two videos you'll see on Inside, the epidemiology one and the clinical one. I basically took a hodgepodge on that. But the first thing I'd like to do is a quick poll to see what you want to see. So I think if you wouldn't mind voting, and then I'll share the results. And then depending what we get, I may change my slides, as we go on the slide. I'm just trying to get an idea of what you want to discuss. So we have 36 people. So please, everybody has the right to vote. Some people have 2 votes. Bernard and Liz, you have to figure out who's going to vote for you. Same thing for Gail. I see 2 people there, so feel free to vote. Okay, a few more people voting. I'm going to share the results. Hopefully that's going to work. Okay, anybody else? Okay, I'm going to stop the polling and share the results. So clearly the variant risk, we're going to spend quite a bit of time on that, and the long COVID, how to get ready for vaccination, the different vaccine, I'll go quickly over that. I'll put the protection mask and the infection risk at the end, and then we can, so I'm going to prioritize it in that order if I can. Okay. And I'm going to stop sharing the results, and I will get a few more polls just to keep you all, active into it. So let me quickly go into what's going on in the world. One of the big worry we have is North America is doing a fantastic job in dropping, but look at Europe and South America, it's bouncing back. They're having a 3rd wave. And the 3rd wave is linked to these variants. And so I think we need to be aware of it, because historically, the US has been 3 to 4 weeks after Europe. And so there's a worry that we may be opening too fast. And we learn from history. And if you learn from history, if you look at 1918, which is the Spanish flu, they had the first wave, the big winter wave, we just went through it. It went down also, and guess what? There was a little bump again in March. The same thing happened with the famous H1N1. A lot of you may remember in 2009, there was that 3-wave form. So we need to keep an eye on that. If you look what's going on in the world, they don't talk it too much in the news. So Brazil is exploding, and Brazil has passed India in the number of cases in the last couple of weeks. And that's that P1 variant that has been identified in Santa Clara, which is unfortunately where we live. And you can see the world that was going downwards up to 2 weeks ago is going back up at 23%. So what we don't want is to see that 3rd wave. To give you an idea, you can see Brazil never really went down after the winter there. It continued to go up, but Chile is the same problem there. Good news is Mexico is doing well. So you're starting to see more closing and lockdown. Unfortunately, the P1 variant is that variation there that increased contamination and also is avoiding the vaccine. And that's a big thing there, because if the P1 spread in Santa Clara, it can decrease significantly the efficacy of the vaccine. And I'll talk more about that. I'm just trying to get the overview right now. Unfortunately, you can see in Brazil is pre-up, but we're having the same problem in Italy now. And if you look at Europe as a whole, Europe is bouncing back up, and it's at a level now that's higher than the summer when they had that big surge. So right now we are leveling in the US, but we are leveling at the level of the last summer. That's too high, okay? And so Europe is now getting into lockdown. Italy is doing a lockdown until April the 6th over the Easter holiday, which is a big deal in Italy. France has done a lockdown in Paris. Serbia is doing a 1-week lockdown. Poland is doing 3-week lockdown. And the problem they're having is that the vaccination rate is less than 10%. They're having problem accessing the AstraZeneca vaccine, as well as a lot of resistance in vaccination in Europe. And they open up too quickly, which I think some of the concerns we have in the US. So another good news is that the Denmark study showed that if you have been infected, what's your chance of reinfection rate? And if you are less than 65-year-old, it's only 1% chance of reinfection rate. So it's pretty low. But if you're over 65-year-old, we know the immune system is weaker as we age. And then they show that the antibodies that you get from the first infection drop by 50%. So if you have been infected over 6 months ago and you're over the age of 65 years old, you need to be careful and you need to get vaccinated. So just be aware, the study just came out. So how are we doing on vaccination? The US has at least 22% of the population as of Friday of last week that has at least 1 dose. Israel is doing incredible at 59%, and the UK is at 40%. So these are kind of the leading country in vaccination. The vaccine is pretty much Moderna and Pfizer. And you can see the emergence of J&J, who just got initially approved. And Sinovac is the Chinese vaccine. And I didn't have a lot of the over international slide. I thought you want to focus on the US. So in the US, the good news, we have dropped drastically on the death and mortality, but we're plateauing. And so we're plateauing at the level of last summer, which we thought was a bad deal at the time. And this is the bad news. 15 states have started rising back up at over 10% growth rate. And so that's the worry, is that we're starting to see a bounce back, including some of the big metropolitan area. There's a New York variation that I'm going to talk about. And the New York variation, you can see the Northeast is starting to lighten up again. We've also dropped the amount of testing from 1.8 million to 1 million per day. What that means is that we may be a bit blinded because we're not doing as much testing as we used to do. So the uptick is Missouri, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island, and Delaware is where we're having some of the hot area there. And of course, as you would expect, Texas and Florida and Arizona. The good news is the positivity rate has gone down, but remember, we have cut by half the test rate. So we have to make sure we're not blind. And if you compare this to where we were 2 months ago at the peak in January, it's a major improvement. I mean, so there's a lot of good news. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to tell you where we are. So Comité, this is a new website from the government called healthdata.gov, and it shows in deep red the transmission rate. And you can see we really were in deep trouble in January. That's why we had this big surge. And now there's an improvement there. But we're not out of the woods. There's still a lot of part in counties there that are pretty high, especially the Southeast. So reality check, if you look historically at the mortality rate, the excess mortality rate in 2017 and 2018, if you remember, we had a pretty bad flu and we had a higher mortality rate than normal season. This is compared to history that this is not the flu. We had an extra 565,000 deaths compared to historical mortality rate in the winter. So it is the reality. So vaccination, we have done amazingly well. It's stunning. I mean, the last couple of months, we have administered over 118 million doses. The good news, the older population, which is most of us here, 67% of people have at least one dose. And so we're doing a good job, especially in long-term care. I was on a conference call today with the CEO of CVS, and she said they've pretty much vaccinated all the long-term care and assistant facility. So that's where we had the biggest mortality. 40% of mortality was in the long-term care. The California dashboard, we're doing better, honestly, than the rest of the country. You can see we have dropped really low. We're much lower than the sun. So in that sense, the California is doing better than other states, and that's because our positivity rate is at 2%. So that's very good. I think we're in slightly better shape than other states. As a result of that, you can see the hospitalization rate has dropped. And what we're looking for is the red. The red is the people over the age of 70 years old. That's what was driving the mortality in California, especially Southern California. And you can see that big drop, a lot of availability in hospitals. That's what we want to see, because not only was it affecting people who had COVID, but everybody that had a heart attack and other cases, they couldn't get bed. And there was a lot of excess mortality from people who couldn't get the best care. So let's talk a little bit about the clinical aspect. This is a picture of the virus. This is using an electron microscope. And you can see in orange is this, unfortunately, this really nasty virus. It's smaller than the width of human hair. You can't see it. So I want to do my second poll, and I have to find it. And let me quickly get it. Post number 2. Have you been vaccinated? I'm assuming most of you have, but it'd be kind of interesting. Not everybody. Okay, let me share the results. So the good news is 59% of us have been vaccinated, me included. And some of you are one dose and some not yet. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, if you know other people, how to get them ready for vaccination and what to expect for people who get the second dose. The second dose is a whoopee, just getting you ready for that one. So astonishingly enough, we have gone to pretty much very low vaccination rate in January to 2.5 million doses on a daily basis, which is, and we're cranking up and the vaccination supply is really improving. California, as you know, is really doing great. We're at 15 to 64 at higher risk. I would expect pretty soon, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be opening up at the 50 years old range. Of course, most of them are going to San Diego, which we had a big nasty surge. Let's talk about vaccine. The Moderna and Pfizer, which is probably the one that most of us have access to, have a 94.5% efficacy rate. And J&J has 100% protection for severe cases. They have a lower overall efficacy rate because they were tested when they were more variant. So you cannot really compare apples to oranges. And so the top 3 vaccine is in the US that's available right now is Moderna, Pfizer, and J&J. As you probably saw in the news, AstraZeneca is having some pushback by the regulatory right now. So I won't spend any time on them right now. So mRNA is very safe. I really want to emphasize that because mRNA basically is a code that tells your body to make the spike protein, and it disappears. That code disappears in a matter of several hours, very quickly there. It doesn't go into your cell. It doesn't change your DNA. So the fact it's called mRNA should not make you worry. It's going to change your DNA. Let me get rid of the results here. And so I just want to reinforce that it's like a software that's telling your body to make the spike protein, and then the body responds by making antibodies there. So it's gone out of the body very quickly. Very different than the traditional vaccine that stays in the body for a longer period of time. So to give you an idea, the Moderna, and I was on a different call with the CEO of Moderna today, and they have an 85% efficacy 12 days after the first dose. So several of you have the first dose. After 12 days, you already have 85% efficacy. After 12 days after the second dose, that's when you get to the 94.5%. Okay, so the good news is that there's still some pretty good protection that you can really see the split there in the curve on the efficacy rate. So how do you optimize your vaccination response? And this for some of you who haven't got the second dose, or if you know people are going to get vaccinated. There are certain things you should not do. You should avoid taking any anti-inflammatory the day before or for 2 or 3 days after you get the injection. And the whole reason is because the anti-inflammatory will dampen your immune system. And your whole objective with the vaccine is to increase the immune system, okay? So unless you have clinical reason, you should talk to your doctor there. You know, try to avoid taking any ibuprofen or acetaminophen or anything that's anti-inflammatory. And because they basically slow down the response of the body there, and that's not what you want. And these are published data there. So what you want is to maximize your immune system before you get the injection. And I'm going to give you a couple of tips that have been published. First of all, try to sleep well. Not sure how well that works because I was stressed out. But you know, you can basically take things to help you sleep the night before, like a good tea or something like that. Or get your husband to give you a massage. I'm just kidding. You do vigorous exercise the day before. If you can elevate your heart rate, I'm not talking running a marathon, but elevate your heart rate doing 15 to 30 minutes of exercise at elevated heart rate, that boosts your immune system, which means you get a stronger antibody response. Avoid stress and depression. Lots of data show that stress and depression decrease your immune system. If you have a sore arm, use ice pack for the first 15 minutes as opposed to ibuprofen.
And I have a quick question while we're on this topic here. What about turmeric?
A turmeric should be fine, I think. I'm taking turmeric. I think I didn't take it the day before and the day of.
Okay. Awesome. And then can the antibodies that we develop from getting vaccinated help existing COVID patients?
Oh, that's a whole different question. So it does help what's called long COVID, which I'm going to be talking about.
Okay, cool.
Typically what they say, you should wait 90 days after you have had a COVID infection. And the reason is that if you give the vaccination, you get such a surge in the immune system there while you're already fighting the virus that it's not recommended. So basically the guidance from Fauci and the CDC is for people to wait for 90 days after they have it. And in fact, what they recommend, but it's not official yet, is to only do 1 dose. So in those cases, you really need to talk to your doctors.
And then after they get vaccinated, is there any, does that help with any antibody for other existing COVID patients after you're vaccinated? Like, can you give antibodies after being vaccinated? Is how I grade the question.
So there is a therapy called plasma therapy. And plasma therapy is that you take the blood out of the people who have survived. And then you basically, you cycle it and you extract what's called the blood plasma, which is kind of more of a yellow liquid. And that is something that's being used in intensive care unit. That's the good news. The bad news, it doesn't work with some of the variants, which I'm going to discuss.
Okay.
And so a lot of this plasma therapy, which was used in very high dose, the World Health Organization just came out 2 weeks ago saying it doesn't really help that much. And number two, it doesn't work with the variants. So I think you're going to see a drop in those type of plasma therapy. So the Moderna COVID arm, this is something I had, and I did not know until I got it. So just be aware of it. You could develop what's called a hypersensitivity reaction there, which is a big rash. In my case, it was really nasty red. You should take antihistamine. Antihistamine does not impact your immune system. And I know that because I went straight to the specialist from Stanford to say, what the hell's going on? In my case, I got it after the first dose, and I basically took antihistamine, Allegra or Zyrtec, depending what you like, the day before the second dose. And the second dose, I didn't have a reaction. It tried, but it didn't show. And it can show up from 2 to 7 days after the injection. And it's not pleasant. So after the vaccination, basically what they think is that, and the CDC just came up with new guidelines literally today, is that, you know, there's no need to quarantine anymore for people who have had the vaccine. You still need to wear a mask because you can still be infected and you can carry the virus in your nose and you can spread it to other people. And so we're going to do a poll quickly about this in a few seconds. And so if you meet somebody that has autoimmune compromise, that is not vaccinated, you should still wear a mask to protect them. Not to protect you, but to protect them, okay? The good news is that a recent study from Israel showed that after you've been vaccinated, your viral load drops significantly by a factor of 4x. So in other words, yes, you still have some virus in your nose, but it's a small amount compared to what you were if you had been infected before, okay? So you want to boost your immune system. Lots of data have shown vitamin D is critical. There's a direct correlation between the severity of having COVID and end up in the hospitals and the people who had deficiencies in vitamin D3. So please get vitamin D3. It's like a little oil pill. And you can buy this over the counter there. And then I have basically put in there the list of the other one. Lactoferrin basically boosts the immune system. NAC is another one that boosts the immune system there. And then, of course, there's some also data on omega-3 fatty acids there. Melatonin, you know, will probably help you sleep and also is also known for cytokine storm. And this is lots of data on vitamin D3. So vitamin D3 is pretty much published multiple ways to show it has a direct correlation with the severity of COVID. I've just published Eastern Vision Medical School. This is in case somebody is concerned. They recommend vitamin C and zinc and all these other things there, but vitamin D3 is kind of a critical one. So I thought I had a poll there, but it's probably coming up. Let's talk about herd immunity. We know that we wanted to get to 65 to 80%. Here's the bad news. Two things determine the herd immunity. Vaccine for everybody. There's not going to be a vaccine for less than 12 years old until 2022. I just got that from Pfizer and Moderna today. It's not coming. They have not even started the enrollment. They have started the enrollment of the kids between 12 and 18, depending on the company there. And they expect the results in the coming months. And the hope is to get those vaccines ready, depending on the FDA, by the opening of school in September. But what it means, that means that it's 65 to 80% of the whole population, which means it's 78% of people over 12 years old. That is a very high bar we need to accomplish. The next problem we have, so it's moving the curve, is that the variants are resisting. And so therefore it's decreasing some of this efficacy, which moves the bar even higher as far as getting the herd immunity. And here's a problem. If you look at the willingness of people to get the vaccine, we are the exception. We are smarter. We have CERT of Delta Hills. Just kidding. Just trying to make sure you're still awake. But you can see that only 47% of people are comfortable taking a vaccine. I think it's going to go up as people get more comfortable, and then they start seeing that there's a drop in the area there where people take the vaccine. France, which is famous for being anti-vaxxer, is having also a problem with their population. And the whole mess with AstraZeneca and blood clot is not really helping there. And you can see the UK has one of the highest rate at 76%. And that's why they have one of the highest vaccination rate right now of 40%. So let's look at the vaccine, and I thought I must have missed my poll.
And can I ask you a couple of questions about vaccines really quickly?
Yeah.
I actually get asked this a lot. So if you have no reaction to the vaccine, does that mean that you don't have enough of an immune response?
What I've been told, if you have a strong reaction, it's good because you build more antibodies. Having no reaction does not mean you didn't get antibodies. But one of the problems is that there is two types of things we're trying to build. One is called the neutralizing antibodies, which is the B cell. And the B cells is what we can easily measure. And then there is and that's the one that's the first level of attack when you get infected. These are the one that we know last at least 6 months, because remember, we don't know. We don't know because we just start vaccinating people. So we know for sure that your vaccine will be effective. We also know that they create more antibodies than if you had had the virus. The level of these antibodies is higher, so you have a longer protection. What we don't know, and which we're hoping is working on our side, is what's called the T cells. The T cells is a second line of defense. It lasts much longer. It could last years. And it's very hard to measure. So when they're doing all this testing with this vaccine, they're measuring the first one, which is the neutralizing antibody, which is easy to measure. There's the hope that the T cells will give us the coverage for at least 1 year, but we don't know yet. Okay, does that help?
Yes. Also, I think you were going to do the poll on this, but somebody was asking, what is safe to do after vaccine?
Yeah, that's coming up. I think I have it somewhere in my phone.
Okay. Okay. I think we've got it.
So let's talk a little bit about this goddamn variants. Sorry, it's frustrating. We've been in all shelter in place for a year, and now you have variants and so let's talk about what's happening. So this is the virus, and then there's this spike protein that's like a receptor. And one of the things I heard today is that normally the first Wuhan virus was like closed. If you look at my hand, it was like a fist. And what has happened with this mutation, it opened up that spike, and so it's easier for it to connect. And what it means is that it takes less virus to get sick, and it's easier to infect it, okay? And then on the other side, we have what's called the ACE2 receptors, which unfortunately is everywhere in the body, cardiovasculars and all of that in the lungs. And that's what attach it, and that's what basically enter the virus into the cell so it can duplicate. So when we look at the mutation there, you may have heard this alphabet soup. And so I'm going to try to explain what that means. If you look at the graphic here, and I hope it's big enough, the N501, the famous N501 mutation there that's creating an issue there is the one that literally is at the end of that receptor. And what it did is opened up that umbrella that, to basically attach easier to your ACE2 receptors. So what does that mean, this alphabet soup of numbers? It basically means that there's 30,000 letters in the genome, and there's only 4 bases. And basically N501 means the amino acid asparagine, which has the title N, was replaced by tyrosine, Y, at the 510 position of the spike protein. So that's when you hear all these numbers, say, who come up with this thing? There's a logic behind it. And the problem with this area there, that means it's much easier for the vaccine to enter your cells, up to 50% easier. And we see that from that famous South African variants that we're worried about, as well as the P1. Both of them are in the Bay Area. Okay, so just be aware of that. The B117 has it too. So these 3 big variants we're worried about have that N501 mutation. Okay, so that's a key one to keep an eye on. The other one you need to be aware of that you're going to hear a lot about is the E484K. It's the same idea. The glutamate A has been replaced by the lysine K at the spike protein position 484. That's the logic of all these numbers. And unfortunately, what it does is that it allows the virus, that mutated virus, to escape the antibodies. It basically masks the antibodies, and so the antibodies doesn't see that new virus. And it is a concern because that's the one that's coming that has that mutation. So South Africa has 2 mutations, the N501, which makes it more infectious, and the 484, which basically makes it avoid the vaccine, and the antibodies are survivors. And it's quite significant. So if you look at South Africa, which is fortunately not too spread in the US yet, it's decreasing the efficacy by a factor of 6x. What you mean is the AstraZeneca doesn't work, and pretty much the J&J only worked at 50%, and then it does impact also Moderna and Pfizer's. Okay, so we don't want that one. And so they're all developing booster shots. They're all working on it as we speak. And the way they're developing the booster shots is not just for that one vaccine, that one variant, but all the different ones that we know could make it worse. And so when you get that booster shot, hopefully in 6 months, what it does is increase your antibodies for a whole bunch of different variations so that the body is more responsive to different type of mutation of the virus. That's kind of the idea behind it. Unfortunately, the US only sequenced less than 1% of all the cases. To give you an idea, in UK, it's over 15%. That's why the UK was able to see all this mutation and quickly intervene and act very quickly. We are blind. We have no idea, okay? To give you an idea, New York City only does 55 sequencing per day, which is nothing compared to the number of cases that they have. So let's look at the South African version. It has this name P1351, and it was discovered first in South Africa. That's why we call it the South African version there. One of the problems that's important to understand is that in South Africa, they have a lot of patients with autoimmune disorders, especially HIV. And what happens is that the virus, instead of saying 10 to 15 days in your body, stays for a much longer period of time because the immune system is not able to control it. That's when we get this mutation. So the discussion we had today showed that they expect more mutation going on in the Southern Hemisphere because they're entering the winter. Good news, we're entering the summer. But they're entering the winter, so there's going to be more mutation because the virus stays longer in those populations there because they're more immune compromised than we are here. So to give you an idea, the South African version there decreased by up to 10x the amount of antibody, the neutralizing antibody that you see in the serum there. So it's pretty much evading a lot of the vaccine. So let's look at the B117. The B117 came from England. And one of the things about this B117, this is the Wuhan, or maybe I should say the private version of the US. You can see it was very acute phase, but pretty much after 12 days, you know, the virus was outside your body. The problem with this mutation there is that it stays in your body longer. And so your infection rate and the amount of damage it can do in the body is staying up to 20 days. So it's a big difference there. And so the good news is pretty much all the vaccines are working on that mutation, and it's becoming the dominant form in the US. So there's a mutation, unfortunately, in California, and it's called the B1427/429. It originally came from Denmark. It has one mutation called L452R. Unfortunately, it's like similar to the other one, it increases the chance of infection. I just summarize it. And it also has, unfortunately, attached to it that South African piece of it, which means it decreased by a factor of 2x the neutralizing antibody. And that's the one we should worry about because it's over 50% of California cases, which means that our 94.5% protection may have dropped. We don't know how much. We believe it could be quite significant there. So you still need to be protective there because it is spreading in California. And that's the B147. So they call this antibody escape if you want to do a search on that. But this is the big worry. It decreased, somebody asked me about the plasma. It decreased by a factor of 6 to 7x the efficacy of the plasma, i.e. the plasma doesn't work on that thing. That means we can, if somebody gets that mutation up in a hospital there, the plasma won't really help them. There's another mutation in New York that has just emerged. And to give you an idea, that mutation was discovered in November. And this was a patient that was autoimmune compromised. And because the virus stayed longer in his body, it continued mutating. In fact, there was a case at Mass General in Boston where a person, they had the vaccine the virus for 5 months, and his immune system was so low he couldn't get rid of it. And the damn thing mutated to the 2 worst mutations we've seen so far. So the longer the virus stays in your body, the longer we have the mutation. I think that's kind of the key takeaway. The New York vaccine has that E484 we talk about, which is the one that decreased again the effectiveness of the vaccine and the monoclonal antibodies. And in a matter of a few months, since the first case was discovered in November, it's now over 62% of the New York cases, the new cases. And of course, it spread to 14 states. And I'm just saying that not to scare you, but I say if Europe is having a third wave and we have this variance increasing here, you really still need to be cautious. So tracking the variants, literally 2 weeks ago, there were barely 1,000 cases of the B117. Now you can see it's pretty much in every state. The B1351, which is the South African one, used to be 1 case. Now it's 180 in half the states. And the P1, which is the one from Brazil, which is really a nasty one, you can see is also spreading. Thank God it's a low amount of case. Unfortunately, it just came up here in Santa Clara. And so this is my poll. Let's do my poll. I thought I had it earlier, but so what can we do after we got vaccinated? I kind of gave you the hint.
Well, they're doing that. And I had one other question. Why should we avoid acetaminophen or Tylenol since it's not really an NSAID?
It's not what?
It's not really an anti-inflammatory.
The data that they study, if I remember, it was UC Irvine, show that it does decrease the level of your immune system. And so when you get the injection, so this is only for a period of 2 to 3 days, you want your immune system as strong as possible because you're having that big bulge of antibody being made. I mean, I think the key is not to take it the day before and the day off. I think if you developed a fever and you feel lousy, like I had a fever and a headache for the second shot, I mean, I was pretty miserable. I think I took some Tylenol or something like that to break the fever. I think I got most everybody here. I still a few people coming in. So let's take a look. You can still, whoops, I lost the poll. Where's my poll? Here we go. So you can still, probably was my computer. So you can still wear a mask with unvaccinated people there. They just came out today saying that if you are talking to your son, your grandson, your grandkids who is unvaccinated, especially children, go for it. It is such a low risk for you to transmit to them. You're pretty much protected to get it from them. It's the other way around. Now, if somebody in your family is immunocompromised, they're recovering from chemotherapy, or you know that they have some autoimmune disorders there, then you really have to be careful. Hug your grandchildren, go for it. I mean, they basically said it's pretty safe to do that. Now, don't go to school and hug every kid. That's not a good idea. No mask with other vaccinated people. The recommendation from the CDC is that if you're in a small group of maybe a few couples, it's pretty safe. Don't have a big party or wedding. But if you're in a small group of people who've all been vaccinated, and then they're reasonable. Go shopping with a mask. Yes, you should still be shopping with a mask. You may still be a carrier, and there's still a risk. Remember that variant is still there, and and so is there. Traveling airplane with a mask. Fauci was still not pushing for that. He was saying we're not 100% out of there, so you still should be wearing. It's not the airplane itself, which have shown to be pretty safe. It's getting into the airport, go for security, taking the taxi, and all those things. That's why you could get exposed. Eating to other restaurants, it's still, you should really be careful there. The hot spot in the winter there, at the beginning there, we had a huge surge. It's all coming out from bar and restaurants in the Midwest. And they really kept track of that. It was really coming out of those places there. I personally stopped cleaning your groceries. We all went crazy. We disinfect everything. We wash everything. I think right now we can probably cool off a little bit there. I'm still, a little bit cautious there, but I'm not as crazy as I was, a few months ago. So, so I think you all have good instinct on that. Let me quickly go where we was time there. I just want to remind you, and I want to talk about long COVID. It's something that's important for ourselves, for our friends, and if you, as a CERT, if you see somebody has a heart attack. So we need to remind ourselves that 45% of the infection happened before you're symptomatic. This is during that period of 0 to 3 to 4 days before you have symptoms. And that was the old one. I've just showed you that these new variants take longer, so therefore you have even more infections before you have symptoms. The other 40% is when you're symptomatic, but it's so mild you may not pay attention to it. And so this is really when the infections are happening there. Only 10% of the infection is from droplets or something that goes on the surface and you touch it and you touch yourself. So it's perceived more and more. It's the aerosol in the air that's the problem. I want to talk about what's called the ticking bomb of long COVID. We have been focusing as a country on the people who end up in the hospitals with severe cases there. And that's what all the effort has been in developing drugs and therapy. And 540,000 people, unfortunately die. And we had 4.5 million people who were severe and ended up being treated in a hospital there. What I'm going to try to teach you here is to say that there's another bad part of the iceberg, the thing that's under it. There's 25 million reported cases, but we believe it's underestimating this by a factor of 2 to 3x, whatever estimates you want to do there. So we may have up to 80 to 100 million people who at some time got infected with the virus. And it's perceived that 10 to 30%, so as a rule of thumb, let's say 25%, are at risk of what's called a long COVID. So I'm kind of explain a little bit what that is. So the long COVID is something the World Health Organization has just recognized to be a global problem. And it could be 8 to 22 million Americans, are basically having some symptoms right now. It can be delayed by several months before you start seeing the first symptoms. And it is a medical challenge because it's 98 different diagnostics, and it's pretty much every body part. It's the heart, the brain, the kidneys, the lung, the pancreas. I mean, just name something. The skin. I mean, it's just a train wreck. And most people complain of chronic fatigue. They can go, people who are running marathons and they cannot go up and down a flight of stairs. These are people with what's called brain fog, which is very similar to Alzheimer's. They can't remember, they can't focus, they cannot do dual tasking. A lot of these people, I'm going to focus right now today on just the cardiac side because we don't have that much time. I just want you to be one of the most worrisome one. And this is the World Health Organization published a report 2 weeks ago that went into details with all the different studies that have been published on this area there. And I'm just pick some of them because I have like a deck of 100 slides with those. So, I mean, if you're interested, look at my video of March the 5th and March the 19th on the clinical side. I do a deeper dive. But pretty much it's coming from everywhere, from Europe, from the UK, from China and all of that, that up to between 20 to 70% of people have damage to their body there. Some of them are showing, unfortunately, to serious ones. So let me talk about the heart damage. Whoops, my computer is difficult. So a study just came out from Italy, shows that we believe we're still learning what's called the mechanism of action, which is there's first the cytotoxicity of the virus into the cell. It just got published 2 weeks ago. The virus goes inside the heart when you have the acute infection, and it starts damaging the heart right from the beginning of the infection there. Then you have what's called hypoxemia, because remember, a lot of those patients have a drop in oxygen there. That's the problem with the lungs. When you have hypoxemia there, you basically kill your heart cells, your brain cells. They don't come back. It's the two parts of the body that don't come back. They don't regenerate themselves. And the third aspect of the cascade is the cytokine inflammation response that happens. And that creates its own sets of damage. And the problem is that it's everywhere in the cardiovascular system. So that means that it's compromising the kidney. So people end up losing kidney functions. It compromises the brains, and it compromises the heart, which has its own needs for oxygen. So if you look at the heart, it does two things. It's like having a small heart attack, but you don't know about it because it's progressive. It's not sudden. And you have what's called myocardial edema. You start having the chambers who start getting weaker and weaker. The heart is having a harder and harder time to pump. The same way as your lungs have fibrosis, and the fibrosis gets more and more rigid, and you have a harder and harder time to breathe. And so if you know about ejection fraction, I mean, I'll give you two cases that happened with two friends of mine, people who worked for me, and they had a nephew and a cousin. People were two men, 32 years old, totally healthy. Both had massive heart attack. The first one did not make it, had lost 75% of his heart function because of this. The second one, they were able to intubate him, and they had to put an implantable defibrillator because he had lost most of his heart functions. And these were totally healthy people, absolutely no pre-existing condition. So if as a CERT, you see somebody who's complaining of shortness of breath, fast heart rate, you suddenly have your heart rate that just pays very high and all of that, you should advise them to get checked, okay? The data just came out that shows that in what's called the cardiomyocyte, which are the lung tissue there that helps you do the contraction there, they find the virus. And the virus is like a train wreck. So normally you have this nice lung tissue. That's what allows you, it's like a rubber band. It allows you to contract. And after that, it's like Cuisinart. It shreds it to pieces. And the nucleus is gone. I mean, it's totally destroyed. And so I think we need to worry. I think we're going to discover 3 years from now, when we look backwards, that the problem was not the mortality, but we're creating a very long list of people who may be at risk of long-term damage there. And that comes from pathology after autopsy. So it's not people who are anxious there. It's based on real data. They have done engineering heart tissue there where they see this happen very quickly when they expose it to the virus. And they have big measurement of what's called the ejection fraction, which is the ability of the heart to pulsate in the blood. So the other thing you should be aware is people that develop an abnormal heart rhythm, especially this really high pace, massive increase, they lost control of the autonomous nervous system, which is the ability of the body to control your vasoconstriction, your temperature, and your heart rate. You don't think about it, it happens by itself. And so that's pretty significant. And so there's a concern. If you look at another one, you can see this is the fiber of the muscle fiber, and this is after the virus. It's like pieces. Okay, so it's a real issue. And when people are complaining they don't feel well, they need to get treated. Okay, because right now most of the primary care providers don't know how to do about it. And it's MRI studies, autopsy. I mean, this is real science. So I'll take a pause, and I think we had some interest in talking about virus and protection, but I want to talk about the variants and long-term COVID. If there's any question.
If you have long-term COVID, how symptomatic are you over that time frame, or are you?
You know, most people they may have had what's called a very mild or asymptomatic COVID, and then suddenly 2 to 3 months later, they get more and more lethargic. They have what's called chronic fatigue syndromes. There, they get shortness of breath, they get the brain fog, they get the headaches, and all of that. And right now there's a group called the COVID Project there, which is self-organized. They get over 150,000 people have signed up because they desperately need peer support. Now the variety of symptoms is all over the places. Some people, they're pretty much incapable of going back to work. And being the World Health Organization estimate between 30 to 45% of these people will not be able to go back to work. If you look at Mount Sinai, which is the first big center in New York that did COVID rehab, they estimate it take a minimum of 6 to 12 months of rehab. We don't know. We're still learning as we go.
And are they contagious during that time period? I mean, how, is it passing, or are they testing high number? No? Okay.
They have no virus inside their body.
Interesting.
They're not contagious. It's just this cascade. I believe there's a couple of things going on. We don't know for sure. We're still learning. The NIH has announced a $1 billion research project, but that's going to take several years before we have the data. So the hypothesis right now, there's several hypotheses. The first one is that you have that inflammatory response, which creates a cascade that basically creates these damages in multiple organs. The second belief is that you may have a genomics that puts you at risk of autoimmune disorders, and the virus basically trigger that autoimmune disorders. Okay, and so therefore then you have it for the rest of your life. And the third one, which is a newer hypothesis, which is you have a virus reservoir. And the reason the virus reservoir came up is because they start giving the vaccine to this patient, and some of these patients, around 30%, felt better. And so the belief is that as you're getting that vaccination, you get that bolus of antibody that goes into the body, and that virus reservoir that starts continuously festering this inflammation process gets cleaned up. These are all hypotheses. Nothing has been validated yet. And you're going to find out more and more talking about it. In fact, the San Jose Mercury was talking about it today. Any other questions? You good?
Yep, you're good. Go ahead.
All right, I'm going to quickly go because most of you know about this. I just want to, this is the virus, which is basically you're asymptomatic, you're infectious before you have the PCR that turns positive. This is 3 to 5 days. So you could be infectious, have a negative PCR, and give the virus to other people. So be aware that if you take the test too early there, and the peak is before the PCR can detect it. So that's the nasty thing about this virus, is that it basically is infectious when you don't know you're sick. And then the antibodies, you basically start measuring the antibodies at 21 days after you had the infection there. So when you look at testing, you have the PCR that tells you am I positive, but there's only a very short window between probably day 5 to day maybe 15 to 20 where you can test it depending which variant you have. And then after that, it's negative before and after. And then the antibody, is the one that we can detect, but you're going to detect after the virus is outside your body, okay? And so we want to avoid to get infected. And I think it's important to know there's several components. The highest risk is a high amount of viral load. Again, it could be less for the variants. Multiply by the time you were with that person, multiply by the frequency of that person. So the CDC initially said 15 minutes. Now it says it's 15 minutes cumulative. So if you have kids playing with other kids for a long period of time, they're going to basically, it's the cumulative amount of time that they get infection. The other big thing is mask versus distance versus ventilation. Ventilation is critical. You see a lot of the school have upgraded their air conditioning system there. They've put more filters. If you have any doubt, do the same thing. I have tons of filter for my house. You know, that was after the wildfires, and I'm keeping them. And I'm going to quickly go over some of that. I have a lot of this in prior videos, so you can take a look at this. But pretty much there's a triangle of protection: the mask, the ventilation, and the distancing. You treat protection there. And the risk of infection is really a function of the environment. If you are outdoor, you know, the 3 to 6 feet, you know, is kind of the issue there, but after that, you don't have to worry about it. So it's really most of the big droplet drops in that 3 feet to 6 feet distance. And then you have the aerosol, which are this tiny particle. Be aware that if it's a dry environment and hot, like Arizona was, the particles get smaller. That means they stay in the air for hours. If it's high and humid and cold, it drops on the ground very quickly there. If somebody is coughing and singing, they can give you a huge amount, 50,000 times higher there. So, so be aware of the environment there. And then there's what's called a Swiss cheese layer. There's not one silver bullet. What you want is a combination of distancing and mask and hand hygiene and all of that. And I hope that people around you do the right thing. I want you to be aware that really aerosol is the key driver. And there's a lot of study there. I'm not going to show you all of it, but formide is pretty much a low risk, you know, i.e. it drops on the surface and you touch. It's still there, you know, so if you go to the supermarket and somebody just coughed before you touch your nose, you don't want to do that. So don't touch your face. And aerosol is really like a smoke. It just floats. And that's the one you want to worry about. And there's been a lot of data where the thing goes way beyond the 6 feet, especially in restaurants with the air conditioning that basically blow the damn thing into the next tables where you are. So, you know, think about like a smoke, and you can see as the particle gets smaller and smaller, that these are the one you worry about. It's not the one close here, because that will be stopped by the mask, but that will be stopped by the short distance there. To give you an idea, when somebody is talking and they can, you know, and shouting, you know, look at the difference in the amount of particle you get exposed to. So be aware, somebody singing and screaming at you, you know, stay away from them. Mask fit is important there. What you don't want is the surgical mask or the cotton mask there that's poorly fitted there, because it basically spreads everywhere. And ironically, the worst place is to be behind them, because what happens is that the particles goes backwards. So if you're in a supermarket and you see somebody with a loosely fit there that's coughing and huffing, go to a different area. Just try to stay away from them. Also be aware that the average mask is only blocking 50% of the emission there. A face shield is only 20%. These are the plastic things you put in front of you. A surgical mask is 65%. The top one, of course, the N95, very hard to get. And so the CDC came up with a guideline to use something with a nose wire, especially for people with glasses. Most of us have glasses. That allows you to basically fold it on your nose, so you don't have the things coming in there and fogging your glasses. It also gives you a better fit, and it's more comfortable to wear. They also are now recommending doing double layers. And so let's talk a bit more about that. You don't want two disposable masks, and you don't want to have an N95 and a disposable mask. If you are lucky to have an N95, just use the N95 by itself. Otherwise, you make it harder for the particle to come out, and you end up breaking the seal against your face. And then there's the concept of the knock and tuck. And there's a video here on YouTube there. And this is a way to fold a surgical mask, you know, in a way that's basically not around your ears, so you have a tighter fit. Okay, it's not as easy to do as it looks. So cloth masks are no longer really, you should be careful. Cloth masks, they're not really that protective. A surgical mask, I think, is probably the best thing to use right now, or get a cloth mask that has a insert. That's a 2.5 micrometer, insert that you can buy on Amazon there. Try to get an N95 if you can. So there's very interesting mask efficacy study that was done at Duke University. And this is the fit N95. You can see it's extremely protective. This is the fleece, which makes it worse, because what it does is that it breaks the particle into a smaller particle that goes through the fleece. So ironically, the droplet become aerosol, which means it's worse, okay? So just don't tell your kids to wear a fleece. And the bandana, of course, is pretty much useless too. This is having nothing. And then you can see most of these cotton masks are not really that protective there. So I think, you know, as we're having these variants there, if you do need to wear a mask in an unsafe area there, you know, try to get a surgical mask because they're available on Amazon. The double masking is the gold standard. The big thing is the K95. Most of what you find on Amazon are the K95. Unfortunately, most of them are not tested by the NIOSH, and I'll show you a picture of what it looks like. Most of them are fake. 60% of this K95 are not doing what they're supposed to be doing there. There's a list here on the FDA website, and it's linked on my video. If you look at my video, I'll put a link there. And you can see if that mask has been approved by the FDA or by NIOSH. So do your homework before you buy on Amazon or wherever you want to buy it. Whoops, sorry. Where's my thing? Fig 95, I had a picture there. Here's what you're looking for. NIOSH. If you have that stamp on your mask, and you have a model number, that is a certified mask by the US government. Very hard to find, but you know, these are the ones that you want to pay. These are the true N95. Unfortunately, the fake N95, you know, they have an ear loop. So try to avoid the ear loop, try to get something that goes behind your head. If possible, that will give you a better fit. And most of the Chinese fake ones have the ear loop. Let me see, mask mandate do work. So CDC study that basically looked at last year and the efficacy of the state that basically put a mask mandate, and it drastically dropped the infection rate and mortality rate. So wear a mask, we did it 102 years ago, and it's still the best thing that works right now. So I'll take a pause so we have more time for questions.
Not too many questions, but I think for us to wrap up, you know, just some takeaways for CERT. You know, obviously we just learned that you want to have the right mask, right? We want to really have an N95 or a really good fitting surgical mask. We still need to be cautious, even though we're vaccinated, because we really don't know the effects of the variants totally on our vaccination, right? So I think that's another thing we need to really be cognizant about. We still need to social distance, and we also need to look at symptomology and not kind of downplay the fact that they might have either a long-term COVID issue or, you know, symptomology that we would think would maybe be something else, but not to really ignore the fact that they could be a long hauler when it comes to COVID. Anything else, Anne, that we can kind of throw out there for the certs?
Yeah, I mean, just be aware that, you know, we may end up being exposed with people who have, you know, clinical events. And I say you need to keep in the back of your mind that if that person had COVID months ago, they may have had some of this damage. I brought it up, which may trigger the medical intervention there, you know, in case you're in that situation there. So look for people who suddenly have a heart attack there, and you may discover that they have this cardiac myopathy there, which is like equivalent of congestive heart failures there. They also have lung compromise there, so their airway may be compromised. As if you're having problems, if you have to help with those patients there, you know, if there's somebody around them, you may ask, one of the first questions to ask is that if you had COVID, you know, as a way to check for that. I'm going to continue to update every couple of weeks. So please, you know, go to my Inside channels on YouTube and subscribe. And, you know, because there's literally, I thought this was going to be for a few months in March, and a year later, here I am. And because there's still a lot of information on a bi-weekly basis that comes out. And so these are all fresh data.
One question about masks. Is it okay to wear the surgical mask and cover it with the cloth mask?
So what they recommend is the reverse, so that you have the cloth mask and then put the surgical mask on top of it. I personally, what I do is that I put an N95 because I somehow was able to have that. And then when I went to get my vaccine, because it was indoor at Stanford, and I was a bit worried about the lack of ventilation there, I basically, you know, I did what I told you not to do, which is I put a surgical mask on top of that. So just to be there. But that was only for like half an hour.
So there's a question about CERT teams helping with vaccinations. I reached out to Marcia Hovey, who runs Cadre, and she said at this time they're not having CERTs help with vaccination sites, but that doesn't mean that might not come come to fruition at some point. So keep checking back with your CERT program managers, unless, Anne, you have any updates. I think city to city, but as far as county, there's nothing available.
Yeah, I mean, I was on the call today with the CEO of CVS, and CVS is doing a massive deployment, and so they say they have a capacity of doing 10 to 20 million doses per month. The problem they have is the supply chain. So right now, we have finally figured out how to inject into the arm. We have basically done that on a massive scale. We're running out of supplies. And so I think the probability that we're going to be asked to help, I think, is low, just because I think we figure out how to do the injection to the arm. And the good news, in the next 30 days, they're planning to drastically increase the availability of the vaccine. Also, I don't know if you watched the news today, but in Europe, they started doing a blockage of export of vaccine outside Europe because they have the reverse problem. They believe that all the vaccination went to the US in priority to Europe. So right now they decide to block the export from Italy and other country outside. It should not be affecting us because a lot of the vaccine are made in the US, but we need to keep an eye on that.
Ann Heppenstall from Los Altos brought up a good point. You can help at testing test sites versus vaccine sites. So she in the chat put out something for, or some links that you can log on so you can volunteer at a couple of sites. I had Cupertino, I've had Cupertino ask for certs to help with vaccination sites. Yeah, so you'll have to, if you're from a different city, you'd have to contact your emergency services manager there, or your CERT program manager, to see what kind of volunteer opportunities there are for you. I know that for us, we've had a couple of vaccination sites, but they have been run by a county, and they've already had enough volunteers. So I know that's,
as you probably know, the last 2 weeks, we had multiple healthcare systems who had to cancel tens of thousands of vaccination appointments because of the supply problem.
Correct. Yes. We've heard that. Mm-hmm. They talked about it in our PIO meeting this morning, that they're hoping to get more, but everyone's struggling with that right now. Tomorrow night, we have Dr. Yu, who's going to talk, and he's from PAMF. And on our PIO call with the county, the command center today, they talked about PAMF maybe having some vaccines. Maybe he can give us an update. He's usually pretty good about letting us know that, but that could be just a rumor, but that was what we heard in our PIO meeting. Yes, we've recorded this, and I'm going to put it onto our Los Altos Hills County Fire website under our calendar, under the scheduled day of today. You can just click on it and there'll be a YouTube link there. But I did put the link in the chat. So if you scroll up, you'll have the link to the Los Altos Hills County Fire District calendar. So you can get that recording. It's been a 12-hour day for me, so I don't think I'm gonna wait for the Zoom recording to upload tonight. Sorry, but I will do it tomorrow morning first thing. So it should be up, so you can share with friends. And I can also send the recording out too. I'll send it to Anne, and then I'll send it out to the Los Altos Hills CERTs. Any last questions before we?
I just posted my YouTube channel there. I mean, I think if you could help me spread the word, I think the key thing, we all need to help people to get vaccinated, get people over the fear of the vaccination there. I mean, there's no doubt that the risk reward is clearly on the reward side.
Right.
Still educate people. They still need to be cautious. It's our role as CERT to provide leadership in the community. So
right.
Help there. And I think if you could use your social media to basically spread my YouTube, that would be great there, because I'm trying to help educate. And I've had some really interesting posting from Ohio, another part of the country there, but that may be a different video since it's recorded.
Yeah, it's really awesome. So somebody was asking, how does COVID change how CERT should respond to a person in distress? Is CPR too dangerous?
Well, if somebody has long COVID, so they're post-infection stage, you're pretty safe. I mean, they may have a heart attack and lung problems and all of that, but they're not contagious. If somebody has COVID and is in the acute phase, there's no doubt that person is contagious.
If they're unconscious, you're not going to know. So I always tell people, you need to make the choice. One, of if you're going to respond to that event. Two, if you're going to choose to assist, then that's going to be decided based on how your comfort level is, what kind of tools you have, what kind of PPE you have. It's pretty much going to be a personal choice. Really, CERTs are not supposed to be really doing CPR. That's kind of outside of what we normally talk about. But just for your personal stuff, since I am a CPR instructor, we're just going to be really cautious about, wearing the proper PPE. You can still do compressions. You don't have to do ventilation. That will still help somebody, right? So you just want to kind of look at your response comfortability in terms of, do I have the right PPE? Am I comfortable in this environment? You should always assume somebody has something. So, the assumption should be based on just general, how you deal with somebody is that they have something that you can get in terms of bloodborne pathogen, COVID, anything really. So I think you'd have to look at the situation and make that determination.
And I think to be a little bit cynical for a second there is that variant in California decrease your protection with your vaccine. So you should assume the worst, which is that person may be infectious to you. And therefore you should take appropriate mask and protection and, cleaning your hands and all the stuff that we have learned in the past. You should assume you could be exposed and you're still at risk.
Right. And remember, you're not a duty to act. So you don't have to really render care. Your job could be just to call 911 and watch and, do what you can do that you're comfortable with. So you always have that, ability to make those decisions too. Someone said people have cooties, don't get them. Agreed, 100%. And assume they have those cooties. That's just a really easy way to work through that stuff, right? Work smart, not hard. So any other questions or comments? I just want to thank you, Anne. I always get so much out of these insights, and it's much needed for us right now, especially with the COVID response with CERT, and we can't get together, but if we have an event that might happen, what should we do? We're vaccinated, we're not vaccinated, we're 1 dose, we're 2 dose. So definitely always good to hear, and then we'll have a nice follow-up with Dr. Yu tomorrow, 7:30. Register if you haven't. Anne, did you put that in the chat? Sorry, other Anne. I forgot I got 2 Anns. Okay. Anne H. In the chat? Perfect. Okay. Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Any last words, Anne Degheest?
Stay safe and get vaccinated and help spread the word.
There we go. All right. Good night, everybody. Stay safe and take care.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you very much.